Today we're going to be looking at why do researchers use animals to conduct studies. So to start off, I want you to answer this journal reflection question and write it as if it was the introduction to an extended response question. I want the first sentence to be your thesis, and again, make sure it meets those 4 criteria, and then give me 2 to 3 sentences to support that and set up the context of why this is important to investigate. Right? With animal research, we want to know why exactly do researchers use them? Why can't we just use people, or why do we have to experiment them on at all? So I'm going to give you the 4 main reasons that researchers use animals, and I'm going to back it up with examples that have rat studies. Rats are used in about 99% of all psychology research studies. They're very genetically similar to humans, so they're just the easiest and the cheapest to use. So the studies I'll use today are all using rats as their main subjects. Right. One reason that we use animals in research is because it's really easy to conduct research using them. Rosenwig and Bennett did a study on rats where they put some rats in isolated, deprived communities. It was a cage with just themselves and food and water. Some of them were put in controlled communities, and so it was them, a few other rats, food and water, and then they had a wheel to run on. And some of them got to be put in like the enriched environment, the party cage, where there were a community of rats, food and water, a wheel to run on, and then a maze of tubes to run through. Right? They lived in these cages for about 6 months, and then they killed all the rats and did an autopsy on their brains, and they looked at neural connections. And what they found is that compared to the control cage, the deprived rats had very few neural connections and therefore an underdeveloped brain. And those that were in the enriched environment had more neural connections, and so they had an overdeveloped brain. Right? I want to use animals for this study because it's cheap and humans are expensive. Right? If I was going to do this environmental control influence, I'd have to pay humans for their time while they're isolated from their communities. Right? That's going to be expensive, and that's going to take forever that I'll have to wait them out and then still keep paying research assistants to keep an eye on my humans in the cages. Right? But with rats, well, I could buy them in bulk and then you can reuse them. Right? And so you have a lot of control over them. Right? You can use them in multiple studies. Right? Obviously, Rosenwig and Bennett did it because, well, they killed all their rats, but most animals are not killed within the course of their study, and so I can reuse them over and over. Right? Researchers, they don't question the researcher, so we don't have to worry about demand characteristics. Right? These rats in their cages, they're just living their best life. They're doing their own thing. Right? There are also less confounding variables. I don't have to wonder how long they've slept or what their nutrition is like or what's their medical history or their background, their family line, because I know all of that because I control for all of that. And so with animal research, we actually get the best cause-effect results for animals because I can control for everything and I know they aren't trying to figure out what's going on. All right, I wouldn't be able to do the Rosenwig and Bennett study on humans, ignoring all the ethical stuff like murder and isolation, just because it wouldn't be practical. And so we like to use animals because it makes doing research a lot easier. Right? We also like to use animals because it allows us to see the effects of behavior across an entire lifespan. We can do longitudinal case studies using animals where it might not work easily with humans. All right, so Frances and a group of her researchers, they were interested in rat grooming behaviors. Some rats, when they groom, they'll lick the skin, and so some rats are really high lickers where they lick a lot, and some rats are low lickers where they lick a little bit. And they wanted to see if this is genetically influenced or if it's environmentally influenced. So they took children of high-licking mothers and put them with low-licking mothers, and then took children of low-licking mothers and put them with high-licking mothers. And then they just saw, is the genetic influence of the biological parent going to override the environmental influence of like the adoptive mother? And what they found is that most rats, even though that they were raised by a mother who either licked a lot or licked a little bit, they held to those biological influences. Right? They tracked this across multiple studies, and so they did multiple generations. And what they found is that if a low-licking baby rat was put with a high-licking mother rat, they were still a low licker, but that child offspring tended to lick a little bit more than the low licker, and it slowly increased over time. Right? So it also indicates that there's a genetic mutation. Right? While the original genes of being a low or high licker held within the first round of rats, across the course of generations, because of those strong environmental influences, like by 4 generations later, those originally low licking genetic rats were high licker mother rats. Right? I couldn't really do this with humans because, well, for humans, they're pregnant for 9 to 10 months, and for each pregnancy, they might have 1 to 3 children. Right? But for a rat, they're pregnant for only about a month, so 21, 24 days. And then for each pregnancy, they'll have 10 to 12 baby rats. Right? I can get more rats at a faster rate, and I can track what happens across their lifespan at a faster rate. Right? For humans, they're not going to be able to start having children until puberty, which is on average 13, 14 years old for women. For rats, they can start making new rats. They can start being pregnant at I think 8 months, right? So again, I don't have to wait as long for them to mature. And so if I want to do these longitudinal studies, I can do them easier with animals than I can with humans. I can look at the long-term effects of drugs. We don't know what might happen for offspring or if you're on it for multiple months at a time. And so a lot of drugs have to go through animal trials before they can be used for humans, just to look for potential negative effects. Right? And then we can gather support for epigenetics. Right? Epigenetics looks at genetic mutations and how the environment impacts your genetic predispositions. Right? And so the Francis study is clearly an epigenetic study by looking at how these things are interconnected, right? And then we can also do studies where we don't need to worry about consent and withdrawal effects, right? If I was going to do this with humans, again, ignoring the potential ethical problem of me taking your child and giving it to somebody new without your consent, I would then have to get your child's consent to stay in the study and then potentially take their children and so on and so forth. Right? We wouldn't be able to do these long generational studies easily because I have to get consent at each step along the way. And 1, hope you come back. And 2, hope that you keep giving consent. And then 3, that your children keep coming back and keep giving consent. Right? I don't have to worry that with animals because they just stay and they let me do my own thing. Right? The third reason why we like to use animals is because they have a lot of genetic similarities with us. So Alberts and his group of researchers, they did a study on rats where they wanted to investigate how much does testosterone actually influence aggression. And so they got a group of rats, and some of them were the control group where they stayed anatomically correct and everything's fine. They underwent a fake surgery on their testicles, but nothing was hurt. Some of them were put into a low testosterone group. So what that meant is that they were castrated, and so their testicles were removed, and so they didn't have as much testosterone. And then the other group was put into a high testosterone group, where they underwent a surgery where they implanted a pump that would double the amount of testosterone that was produced within their body. All right? Animals share so many biological structures with us that I can make inferrals that if this happens with my rats, then it's probably going to also happen within humans, without actually having to do that experiment on humans, right? It would probably be very difficult to find a group of men willing to undergo this potential testicle castration situation. We find that rats, they have 99% of the same genetic material as humans do. They have similar brain structures. They produce similar amounts of hormones and neurotransmitters that humans do. And so if I look at how their body chemicals influence the rats, I can make an inferral that those same body chemicals do the same thing within humans because of how similar we are. And it's not just biological similarities, right? It's also personalities. Rats are highly sociable and altruistic. They will help another rat that's trapped under a lever of pressure. escape, not because the helpful rat's being rewarded, not because the helpful rat gets anything. They just like to be helpful, right? And we can track sociability and altruistic rates within humans where they correlate, they kind of align, right? Rats are motivated thinkers, they're problem solvers. And so, again, even if they aren't being rewarded, they're not having an incentive to run through a maze or figure out how to unlock a box, they'll still do it just because they're curious. And we find the same thing within humans. Even if we're not rewarded for something, we'll mess with new objects just because we want to see what they do and how they work. And so we could do these studies on animals because they are so similar to humans without worrying about all those ethical considerations. All right. And the last reason why we use animals in research is because we're just curious. Rats are interesting. Animals are interesting. So I just kind of want to see what might happen. Calhoun, he did a study in his basement where he built this rat city. And so had high-rise cages where they could live, and they all had their own little rooms. And then there was like a communal watering trough. So it was like the town square where everyone came in. And he just wanted to look at how they developed social hierarchies and how they all came together. Eventually, his little rat city became overly crowded. And so he wanted to see how the rats managed that. And what he discovered is that as it became more densely populated, rates of neuroticism, emotional instabilities, tended to increase. Right? And so he speculated just by watching these rats live in their city that he created for them, that maybe the reason why we have higher rates of mental illness within cities is because of how densely populated we are. We just get in each other's ways and it makes us emotionally unstable. Right? He only discovered that because he was really interested in how animals construct their social hierarchies and how they interact with each other. Right? So sometimes we just want to see what animals do. By doing animal research, we could help them improve the lives of animals in captivity and pets. A lot of zoos, they've changed the way that they do their enclosures to mimic the natural environment, and it's helped the animals have lower rates of depression and be happier. We can understand how animals in the wild act, and that can help with city planning. And as urban communities spread outward into previously animal-controlled environments, we can try and plan our roads and our housings in such a way that it might not impact those wild communities. Right? And then, again, animal speculation can help us figure out how humans might react. Right? The altered environments for those rats within the highly densely populated rat city makes us understand a little bit more about humans and what might happen if we were placed in a similar environment. All right, so these are all the different reasons for why researchers use animals. All right, when you're finished with your last question, submit your Edpuzzle work and then go and do your reading notes for the rest of the assignment. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and then have a great long weekend, everybody. Oops.